ago at agility, we had a dog that didn't want to work and didn't want to go over the jumps or tunnels, really wasn't interested. And the owner was feeding the dog kibble, and they felt that the dog only should really work for kibble, like that should have been good enough. So the one time we tried, it was either a hot dog or a rotisserie chicken, and then at that point the dog was really engaged, really showed a lot of enthusiasm.
Motivation level came up.
And then I think the following week they came back and they just wanted to use kibble again, and it wasn't working, and they ended up actually stopping it. They didn't come to the training anymore because the dog wasn't showing interest in the kibble. And I was a bit confused because we had something that actually worked, and the dog was actually doing really well. But then when they went back to the kibble, it just wasn't, there was no interest there.
Yeah, the drive wasn't there for the food. So there's different ways of looking at food motivation, right? One of the old school ways was like use hot dog, use chicken, use steak, like use tasty stuff. And that there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, right? I'm not totally opposed to that. But one of the things that we work on here is developing games with food, right? Making the food valuable through a game, not just valuable through what its like face value is, right? Like as if it was dollar bills, right? So the idea behind kibble is like it's their meal and you make them earn their meal and things like that. And nothing necessarily wrong with that. Depending on what I'm teaching, kibble works great. It can sometimes not work great for bigger challenges for dogs. Like agility can be challenging for some dogs. But what I like to do, and this is I think where a lot of people skip, laying a foundation of food motivation first, which is one of the things that we teach. Like if you don't have motivation for food, like it's not fair to like start going into teaching phases and pushing dogs to learn things. So one of the things we do is we build games with our food. So whether I'm working with kibble or liver or chicken, right, I'm creating chasing games. They're chasing me. I'm rolling food. They're chasing food. I'm running away. They're chasing me to get food. And I make it a big game to build motivation for the game, right? So like today when Jamie was working with Raiden, I said like stop rewarding him in position, right? Because he like takes it and he's like, like his motivation was down. Now we never changed the food. We changed what we did with the food, right? So it was no longer good and feed him in position while we're still moving. It was yes, and then it was chase, and he was like totally into it. The value of the food didn't change on the spectrum of tastiness. It just changed in what we were doing with it, and it made it more fun. If you lay a nice foundation with food where the dog associates food rewards with games, even if you don't do it every repetition where you make them chase, if the idea is there, their motivation is higher for the food, right, because of the game you created with it, right? Like if they understand that games can turn on with it, the motivation is still there. Now, it sometimes will drop, but if every once in a while you add in a chase moment, you bring that drive back up, right? And that's why movement in dog training is so helpful. With agility, they're already moving, and we're kind of like using food as like a lure sometimes to get them to go over things. So if instead of like they go over the jump, or I don't really know agility, so like tunnel, whatever, if instead of just like giving it to them when they get to the other side or the end of it, if you mark it and they understand the marker and you run away and they chase you for the food and then you go back to the next thing, they're going to be more motivated to figure out each and every apparatus, theoretically. And that's the way that I do like the small challenges course in here. If I'm doing motivation type stuff with it and not leash, as soon as they hit the other side, I'm like, yes, I run away, we play a food game, and then I go back to the next thing. And they're like trying to figure out what I want them to do, but they're motivated to do it. And I use a lot of kibble to train dogs here. But it's not about the food, it's about the game that you play with the food is the motivating factor. So it all depends on how you look at food motivation. There's nothing necessarily wrong with going to a higher value, but if the dog starts building the same mindset, at some point that they did with the kibble because it's just boring, right? It's tasty, so everything new is always tasty for them. But I've seen dogs lose motivation for liver, chicken, like hot dog, like all sorts of things because the foundation of the game foundation was never laid. And then people are constantly switching what treats they want to use, right? They're like, this week we're going to use this, or sometimes they have like the mixed like bag of like hot dog and chicken and all sorts of stuff in there, and they're constantly rotating what they're using so the dog doesn't lose interest. I think that's a lot of work, and I don't think that that's also really great for their gut. That's just me though. So I'll try and pick one thing. If it's kibble, great. If it's something just a little bit higher value, I'm okay with that. But I worry about building the motivation with the food and the game rather than relying on the value of the food to motivate the dog. I want to be the one that gets them.
What if you're having trouble getting the dog to engage with food in game?
It,
Like you're trying to build up the drive, and it's still not happening.
Food deprivation. So like, I'll do a ration control. So like, you earn your food by chasing it. You chase it, you eat it, you chase it, you eat it. And that's what they would have to do in the wild. Right now, if there's some dogs, if you think about it, some dogs are just not natural hunters. And like, those are the dogs that likely wouldn't make it as like a wild dog. So I'm not gonna like starve them to death, right? It's modern society. I'm not gonna starve them to death. So yeah, I'll like feed them their meals, and then maybe I'll use something of higher value to get them a little bit interested. But typically, even that higher value stuff doesn't get them like going like crazy, right? Like Maya's always had trouble with motivation. It almost doesn't matter what kind of food we use with her. Like the games don't interest her that much. She's always just kind of been down, and that's who she is. So not all dogs are able to, there's realistic like genetic capabilities there. But for people that want to use their kibble, if the dog's not motivated for it, likely they never laid like a game foundation to begin with, and the dog is like, wow, I can eat this out of a bowl at home. Why do I have to jump over this thing or go through that tunnel? Whatever. So playing the games is an important part of that. Again, that's all relative to like who you're working with and what their understanding or their approach to dog training is. Ours comes off of like a lot of gameplay, right? Like same thing with toys. Like I have the one black tug that's over there with no handles, one of them. Achilles has been playing with that since he was like 5 months old. Never lost any value. He loves it just as much because it's about the game that we play with it, not about the actual toy. Same thing with ball. Like I use the same ball every single day, all the time, but it's about the game that I might play with it. Sometimes I just drop it and he gets to have it and he just runs around and celebrates. Other times I release him and I go forward and then I come backward and he has to chase it and I make him miss and it's frustrating and it's a game. He's chasing it and then he gets to catch it. But I'll do the same thing with food too, right? I'll laying a game foundation with food. Sometimes I'll roll it, I'll run the other way, I present one, and I'm like, oh, you missed it. And that's what we do in our focused healing work, is we're feeding, and then we're like, hey, there's another one. And then we loop them around, and they have to chase it again. It's no different. It's just a game. But yeah, I mean, if they naturally aren't going to be motivated for their kibble, I'll try and find a kibble that they like. If I can't, then yeah, I'm moving on to liver or Red Barn or Happy Howie's or hot dog or chicken, something like that. But I do as minimal amount of that as possible so that I'm not making the dog overweight or upsetting their stomach, because they can get upset stomachs. And then in a training process where they're here for days on end, like if I give them the runs, they're not going to work that day, and I need them to work. So that's why another reason why we push really hard for them to work for their kibble, so that they don't get sick. Because we don't have time, because we're on a deadline, we don't have time for like daily setbacks or anything like that. But that's all relative to what you know and who you learn from. Food motivation is a really big topic in dog training, but I think if you teach the games and the dog enjoys the games, you can use that. And she never knew games until recently, and her motivation for food is continuing to grow. If you keep playing the games and build up those games, it'll just continue to grow even more. Now, depending on what you're using, what are you using?
Today was the treats that freeze-dried.
Okay.
At home I use kibble.
Yeah. So, like, depending on what you're using, at some point in time, like my dogs, now they have really good food drive, but like I can throw a piece of like some other dog's kibble and I can have a treat and they'll go after each one of them like identical. Doesn't matter to them. Other dogs, it's like you present their dog food and they're taking it and then you bring something else out and they're like, holy cow, what is that? Right? And you get like another level out of them. But then what can happen is they'll never work for you the same that they were previously for their kibble. They'll actually work less because they had something higher. So you can lower the value of their kibble by giving them high value, which can screw up like obedience training and stuff like that. So there might be reasons why they didn't want to use high value. Food allergies, there's all sorts of reasons people will avoid that. But yeah, I mean, I won't push people to use treats. I will push them more to use kibble. If it's not going anywhere and I'm not that stubborn where I'm going to be like, it has to be. Right? I'll be like, yeah, let's try something else. Let's try something else. When they're here and they're working under me in a board and train, it's kibble. I mean, most of the time it's kibble. You can ask Sana. It's like, are we feeding them dinner tonight? I'm like, no, he didn't work really good. He gets like a quarter cup just so they don't have an empty stomach. But then the next day, in the morning, I bring you out and I present food to earn and work for. They're like, all right, I'm in. I'm freaking hungry, man. And then they learn that the games are actually fun, and then they buy in. They're like, oh, this is actually cool. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me this was going to be cool and fun? I'm like, hey, man, you didn't listen. But once they get bought in and they start working really nice for their food, then it's just like, yeah, feed them. It's cool. Because every time you bring them out, even if they're not super hungry, they're like, yeah, we're going to play that game. Love that game. And I might do like 5 repetitions of like sit or down or place command or even some of this stuff, and then reward them once with a game, but then they don't know when the game is going to turn on. So every repetition, they're like, I'm like, sit. They're like, you going to run? No? Okay, maybe the next one. Sit. You going to run? Right? And at some point in time, I run, and I make them chase, and they're like, I knew it. I knew you were going to do it. I was just waiting on it. Right? But you build anticipation for the game, and that's where the real motivation comes from. So, long answer to your thing, but the game is really valuable if you know how to utilize it.